Hey, Gloria Day, it's Pastor Chris, and we're so grateful to have you along this journey as we read through the whole New Testament together this year. I hope you've been finding these videos really helpful and encouraging. These are great ways to get a little bit deeper look into all of the New Testament and the stories that are there. For this week, we're going to be tackling the entire book of Galatians. We've made our way through the Gospel of Mark, and we had a little bit of a look at the end of Mark's Gospel with Pastor Sarah last week, and the resurrection of Jesus, of course. And that resurrection of Jesus leads us into the early church. And the Apostle Paul was one of those big sort of presences, really one of those main people in the early church. He had this kind of larger-than-life personality, all kinds of things we can learn about the Apostle Paul and his life. He was converted to Christianity, or the Way as it was known, through an experience with Jesus along the road. God came to him and opened up his eyes and led him away from being a persecutor of the early Christian church to one of its most adamant and faithful devotees. And Paul absolutely loved the gospel of Jesus Christ. It made an impact in everything he did and said. And so we're going to take a look at his letter to the Galatians today and just sort of wrap our minds around what was happening at that time he was writing a letter. So one of the things we learn is that Paul wasn't even intending to go to this region or this province, this Roman province of Galatia. In fact, he ended up there because, as we're told in chapter 4, I believe it's 13, verse 13, he says to the Galatian church, "You know that it was because of a physical infirmity that I first announced the gospel to you." So Paul ended up in this region sort of by chance, but he used it as an opportunity. He used his illness, whatever it was, his physical infirmity that he was facing, he used it as an opportunity to proclaim the gospel to these people in Galatia. Now, we don't know a lot about the people in Galatia, or who they were, what they were about, or even really about the territory. A few of the things, though, that we do know are that these people were at least curious about Christianity and Judaism. They were Gentiles, which means they were not part of the Jewish faith. They did not believe in the one true God, and they had maybe all sorts of other gods that they followed. But these Galatians were often referred to as at least God-fearers. Which is an interesting term. They had this unique relationship with Judaism and the early church of Christianity. They were curious, they were wondering, they were kind of trying to wrap their minds around who this God was and what he was about. And so they had this relationship, at least a distant one, to the faith. And Paul finds them, discovers them, like I said, as he was kind of held up by an illness or some sort of physical ailment that happened. And he finds them curious about the faith. And he begins to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news of Jesus, who's died and been raised for their sake. Now, what's interesting about that is that these Galatians hear for the first time that the promises of God are not only for the Jewish people, but also for them, for the Gentiles, for those outside of the faith, these God-fearers, these ones who are curious about the gospel. I think that's a fascinating place to go and to kind of dig into the book of Galatians, and understanding who they are and what Paul's message to them is. It really is, you now are part of this promise, part of this promise that God is making to the Jewish people, to these new Christians, and now to the entire world, to all of the Gentiles. And so as we read through the book of Galatians, we'll read through the entire book together this week. And you'll notice that Paul is encountering some people who are trying to really change the understanding of the gospel that Paul preached. They're trying to go back and they're trying to add all of these laws and these rules that the new Gentile converts to Christianity are supposed to be following. And Paul's coming to them and saying, listen, whoever's telling you that is wrong. We're not adding to the gospel. You've heard the gospel proclaimed. There's nothing to add to it. You are part of God's family. You are justified in your faith and only your faith. It has nothing to do with the rules and the laws that you're being told that you have to keep. Instead, your faith is adding you to the gospel or to the good news of God's family, and you are being welcomed into that without all of these rules and these laws. So we discover in the book of Galatians Paul's encouragement to stick to the true gospel, to be curious about the faith, to continue to be curious about the faith, but not to let that curiosity drive them back to the old ways of doing things, the old rules, the old laws that were kept, but instead to look forward into the freedom and into the good news of God that he has for even those who are being added to the promise. So I hope you're really enjoying this look at the New Testament, and as we dig into some of Paul's letters here, we'll be looking at Galatians and Hebrews and Ephesians and Corinthians, and it'll be a great chance to get a look at the early church and what that Apostle Paul was up to as he's writing his letters to these churches that he dearly loved. Hey, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you. God bless you all.